Imagine building the city of the future, your life's masterpiece, only to have your wife and best friend steal it from you. Not just the plans, your name, your legacy. But instead of screaming, you stay silent. And you begin to build something else. Colder, smarter, unstoppable. That's when the real story begins. There was a certain stillness in the air of Halebrook, a coastal city perched between sea cliffs and urban ambition. Alden Crane, a 38-year-old architect known more for his vision than for self-promotion, thrived in that quiet. His latest obsession, a self-sustaining green city nestled in the Northwest Highlands, had consumed nearly every waking hour over the last 6 years. Alden wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing legacy. Mornings in the Crane household were ritualistic. Alden would wake before sunrise, brew dark coffee in silence, and sketch revisions on tracing paper, the quiet hum of classical music always in the background. His wife, Mira Halden, would rise an hour later, graceful and poised, always complimenting him on how focused he looked, even if he barely heard her. They had been married for 8 years, and on paper, everything looked picture-perfect. Mira, an arts curator, had charm and elegance that matched Alden's quiet intensity. From the outside, they were a power couple. But inside, Alden had begun to sense a subtle shift. Words delayed, smiles rehearsed. Her eyes lingered too long on her phone. He convinced himself it was stress, the museum's expansion, the constant gala events. People changed with pressure, didn't they? Alden's closest friend and longtime collaborator, Stellan Voss, had been in his life since their university days. They had once shared a cramped dorm room in Vermont, scribbling dreams of reshaping cities on the backs of pizza boxes. Stellan was everything Alden wasn't: charming, fast-talking, and dangerously persuasive. Investors loved him. So did the media. If Alden was the mind, Stellan was the mouthpiece. Their partnership had produced some of the most innovative eco-architecture of the last decade. Together, they had acquired land, attracted environmental grants, and sketched out blueprints that promised to change the way humans lived with nature. The concept was revolutionary. A city powered entirely by renewable sources, with vertical farms, climate-responsive housing, and integrated public transit free from fossil fuels. It was called Alaris, a name chosen by Alden for its soft, timeless ring. But something inside him had shifted. It started subtly: minor miscommunications during project meetings, Stellan canceling calls last minute, Mira attending more functions alone. There were no glaring signs, just an ache, a low hum of dread that settled in his chest like a storm preparing to rise. One Sunday afternoon, he returned home early from a site visit. The house was quiet, but not in its usual comforting way. Myra's scarf was tossed across the back of the couch, her heels abandoned at the foot of the stairs. Her phone buzzed once, twice, then stilled. Out of instinct more than curiosity, Alden picked it up. He had never done that before. Trust had always been unspoken. The message preview on the screen wasn't long. Just a name, Stellan, followed by a heart. And an unfinished sentence: "Can't stop thinking about." He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Instead, he placed the phone back exactly as it was, walked upstairs, and locked himself in the guest room for the rest of the evening. The classical music played again, but this time it was drowning. He didn't confront Mira. Not yet. He didn't call Stellan. He didn't cry or rage or throw anything against the walls. He did what Alden always did when things cracked beneath the surface. He planned. Quietly, precisely, without telling a soul. The next day, he started collecting data: old emails, project documents, land title transfers. He pulled bank records, traced timelines, and rewatched archive Zoom calls with a detached, almost surgical gaze. There were discrepancies. Files shared without his consent. Dates that didn't align. Proposals rewritten and sent to third parties he never approved. What began as emotional betrayal was quickly becoming something far more sinister. The project he had devoted nearly a decade to, the physical embodiment of everything he stood for, was under threat. And the people he trusted most were not only disloyal in love, but in ambition. But Alden didn't spiral. He did not allow grief to consume him. Not yet. He knew that to protect Alaris, to preserve what truly mattered, he would need to be more than a victim. He would need to be methodical. He would need to outthink them. And so, with a calmness that would terrify anyone who knew him well, Alden Crane began drafting a new blueprint. Not for a city, but for something far colder. For revenge. The days that followed were quiet, but in the most unnatural way. Alden Crane moved through them like a ghost, present, but disconnected. Meetings with city planners became mechanical. Words left his mouth with little force. He still sketched, but not for progress. Now his sketches were for memory, attempts to remember what Alaris once meant before betrayal blurred its lines. Each night, Mira Halden would return home, drop her bag, kiss him on the cheek with that same elegant detachment, and ask about his day. He would answer with a soft murmur, his eyes never really focusing on hers. The phone never left her side now. Password changed. Notifications silenced. But Alden had already seen enough. He could no longer look at her without feeling the invisible fingerprints of Stellan Voss on her skin. Her voice, her laugh. It wasn't the physicality of the betrayal that crushed him. It was the orchestration, the coordination, the fact that two people he trusted more than anyone else had been carefully rewriting the script of his life behind his back. Late at night, he sat in the guest room, no longer a refuge but a war room. The lamp on the corner desk cast long shadows over piles of documents. He wasn't just looking for evidence now. He was trying to understand why. Why Alaris? Why him? Why now? That's when he found it. A transfer document buried in a series of emails between Stellan and a consulting firm based in Vienna. It was dated 4 weeks prior, around the same time Mira had flown out for a curator's summit in Denmark. But the email thread showed that Mira had been CC'd on multiple correspondences discussing the intellectual property rights of Alaris. Alden's name appeared nowhere in the proposed deal. The firm had been offered early access to the project's schematics, urban layouts, and infrastructure models, the core of his decade-long vision, in exchange for private funding and global rollout rights. In the message body, Stellan had referred to Alaris as a collaborative concept developed jointly with Mira Halden. The erasure of Alden was clean, deliberate. He stared at the screen, his jaw tight, fingers clenched so hard the knuckles whitened. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, premeditated, cold-blooded. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel it all, the pain, the fury, the humiliation. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and buried his face in his hands. There was a deep ache behind his eyes, the kind that no sleep could cure. The kind that whispered, "You were never enough." But the breakdown didn't come.
No shouting. No weeping.
Just silence. He stood and crossed the room to the window. Outside, the city was sleeping. Halebrook's skyline was speckled with soft lights. Some blinking red, others cool blue. He had once imagined placing Alaris just beyond that horizon. Now it felt distant, polluted. The next morning, he met with the project's legal advisor, under the guise of a routine audit. His questions were pointed, his tone calm. The advisor didn't suspect a thing. But Alden was listening closely, to every pause, every unsure detail. The paper trail was unraveling, and with it, the illusion of trust. At home, Mira continued her act, subtle, sophisticated, well-rehearsed. She still brought him tea. Still asked if he was overworking again. Her eyes occasionally searched his, perhaps wondering if he knew. But Alden had perfected the art of stillness. He let her believe he was unaware. That was the only way this would work. He stopped sleeping altogether. Sleep was a luxury for the naive. Instead, he read everything. Contracts, patent submissions, code review reports. He traced every file Stellan had accessed over the last 2 months. Each click, each download, painted a picture of how deeply the betrayal ran. What hurt more than the theft was the clarity, the sudden realization that he had been walking toward this cliff edge blindly, trusting footprints that were never meant to lead him forward. Everything had been a lie, but clarity also brought strategy. Alden knew now that this wasn't about confronting them. It was about outmaneuvering them. If Alaris was to be saved and his name protected, He had to move with precision, not rage. In the silence of that war room, Alden Crane stopped being the architect of dreams. He became something else entirely. The architect of consequences. Alden Crane had always believed in structure, in order, in logic, in the quiet geometry that held great ideas together. But now, his once methodical mind moved with a different rhythm. Revenge had no symmetry, no blueprint, no predictable timeline. Yet Alden approached it the only way he knew how, like a design challenge. A flawed system to be corrected. He began by isolating the weak points in Stellan Voss's plans. Not just the theft of Alaris, but how it was meant to unfold. The Vienna firm was merely a pawn, an intermediary shielding a larger investor from scrutiny. Through encrypted metadata left in the architectural files, Alden traced the path backward, to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands and eventually to a larger conglomerate known for acquiring green infrastructure startups. It was a complex scheme, but Alden saw the pattern, and he knew how to break it. Meanwhile, Mira continued her performance, oblivious to how closely she was being studied. Alden had installed discrete surveillance software on her devices. He wasn't proud of it, but pride was no longer part of the equation. She still exchanged messages with Stellan, coded in tone, vague in details, but laced with anticipation. They were preparing for something, a launch, a presentation perhaps. Timing was essential. Alden didn't rush. He understood that premature exposure would only play into their hands. Instead, he focused on removing their leverage quietly, one thread at a time. He started by contacting an old acquaintance, Felix Aren, a cybersecurity specialist he once helped design an AI-driven energy grid. Felix now worked independently, consulting for green energy developers. Alden didn't explain everything. He simply said, "I need to know who's watching me, and I need to disappear in plain sight." Felix delivered. Within a week, Alden had compartmentalized all his digital files, rerouted access protocols, and implemented tracking flags into any document Stellan or Mira attempted to share. Every click, every forwarded email, now sent a silent alert back to Alden's terminal. It was no longer just about watching, it was about control. His second move was legal. Quietly, he filed a provisional patent under a new project name, Hailcore Initiative, structurally similar to Alaris but enhanced with a new modular layout and adaptive AI infrastructure. It wasn't theft. It was evolution. Mira and Stellan could steal a concept, but they couldn't replicate innovation, especially not without him. Next, he reached out to Leona Marr, a high-profile sustainability journalist with a reputation for dismantling corporate greenwashing. Through an anonymous Dropbox, he began leaking partial documents, internal emails, altered blueprints, financial projections signed by Mira and Stellan. The story wasn't complete, not yet. But Alden was building anticipation, like pressure behind glass. Then came the bait. He uploaded a decoy proposal for Alaris 2.0, polished, detailed, seemingly incomplete, and let it sit on a shared drive Mira had access to. It took less than 24 hours for the file to be opened, copied, and sent to Stellan. From there, it was forwarded to an executive contact at the Vienna firm. Alden watched every step in silence. The trap was working. Behind the scenes, Alden reassembled a quiet coalition of former collaborators. Engineers, designers, urban planners, people who had once believed in Alaris before politics and money had clouded its future. Many were disillusioned with the current trajectory. When Alden presented Hailcore to them in a private, encrypted conference, their reactions were immediate. Excitement, loyalty, and, most importantly, discretion. For the first time in months, Alden felt grounded. Not vindicated, that would come later, but purposeful. On the evening of March 18th, Mira received an invitation to an exclusive design symposium in Oslo, a cover event arranged by Alden through a third party. Stellan was set to attend as well. Both believed they were being honored for their upcoming urban sustainability proposal. Neither suspected that the symposium was wired, that Alden had ensured their entire presentation would be recorded, including the false claims of authorship and manipulated data. It was never about public humiliation. That would be too easy. It was about proof. Undeniable, time-stamped, cross-referenced proof that would not only discredit them in the architecture world, but legally sever their claims to anything related to Alaris or Halecore. The moment they stepped onto that stage and spoke those rehearsed lines, they signed the final page of Alden's blueprint. He wasn't finished yet, but the foundation of their downfall had been laid. With meticulous calculation and unflinching resolve, Alden Crane had begun construction, not of a city, but of justice. The morning of the symposium arrived with an overcast sky over Oslo, casting soft light on the glass-paneled venue nestled along the harbor. Inside, rows of chairs were filled with investors, academics, and journalists. The presentation listed on the program as Urban Future, Modular Sustainability, was credited to Mira Halden and Stellan Voss, two names now gleaming with borrowed brilliance. Alden Crane was not in the building. He didn't need to be. The camera feeds, the microphones, the embedded metadata in every visual, all had been arranged remotely. What mattered most was already in motion. On stage, Mira stood poised, her voice even, her gestures confident. Beside her, Stellan wore his signature smile, practiced and precise. They spoke of collaborative innovation, of visionary partnerships. The audience listened, intrigued. But what no one saw, not yet, was that every word, every diagram, every timeline they referenced had a hidden signature. Embedded proof that the origin belonged to someone else. To Alden. By the time they stepped off stage, emails had begun landing in inboxes. Leona Mar's exposé, months in the making, had gone live. The headline was clinical: Theft in the Green Age, How Innovation Became Currency, but the body of the article was surgical. It detailed the intellectual manipulation, the falsified timelines, and the personal betrayal masked as partnership. Screenshots of emails, mismatched contract signatures, metadata from original blueprint files, all layered with forensic clarity. The article made no wild accusations. It didn't need to. The evidence stood alone. Alden didn't watch the chaos unfold in real time. He was in Halebrook, walking along the coast just after sunrise. The city felt quieter than usual, or maybe he was just more aware of its rhythm now. For the first time in months, his thoughts weren't racing. They were settling. Later that afternoon, his legal team sent confirmation. Mira and Stellan's rights to Alaris had been formally revoked. The Vienna deal was terminated. The firm's lawyers, having reviewed the leaked documents, swiftly withdrew. Civil litigation was underway, but Alden didn't care for courtrooms. His justice had never been about lawsuits. It was about identity, reclaiming authorship, reclaiming self. Calls from former investors began to come in within 48 hours. Some expressed apologies. Others offered renewed interest in what Alden planned to do next. But he wasn't rushing. Instead, he invited a few trusted collaborators back into his workspace, laying out revised plans for Halecore. He didn't promise grandeur. He promised integrity. Meanwhile, Mira disappeared from public view. The museum quietly placed her on sabbatical. Her curated gallery launch was postponed indefinitely. Whispers circled, but she offered no public statement. Stellan, in contrast, attempted damage control, issuing a vague apology about miscommunication in creative ownership. No one bought it. Their reputations fractured, and Alden? He didn't rise by force. He rose by silence, by patience, by precision. Construction on Halecore began 6 weeks later, just outside a reclaimed industrial district near Portland. The site was chosen not for beauty, but for purpose. A wounded land to become something living, something honest. Each foundation laid was a statement, not of revenge, but of rebirth. At the launch event, quiet, invitation only, Alden stood before a modest crowd. He didn't make a speech. He simply unveiled the first phase of the project, a model layered with green spaces, adaptive housing units, and self-sustaining systems. People didn't cheer. They stood in stillness, absorbing the reality of it. Not the fantasy sold in brochures. The real thing, built not from illusion, but from survival. In the weeks that followed, Alden spent more time on site than behind a desk. He walked the grounds each morning, learning names of workers, asking about their families. He knew that rebuilding something from ash required not just vision, it required presence. He no longer needed recognition. What he needed, he had built with his own hands. The betrayal, the theft, the erosion of trust, they would always be part of his story. But they were no longer the headline. Now, they were just the soil beneath something stronger. Alden Crane had risen, not as a victim, but as a builder of cities, of legacy, and of a life no longer shared with liars. Years passed, but Alden Crane never measured time in numbers anymore. He measured it in the rhythm of wind turbines turning in the morning fog, in the pattern of solar grids humming quietly beneath cloud-filtered light, in the voices of children echoing through the parks of a city that once existed only in sketches. Hillcore had become real, not a spectacle, not a marketing pitch, but a living, breathing organism. It stood just beyond the eastern edge of Portland, once a wasteland of rust and concrete, now transformed into a lush, modular ecosystem where technology and nature weren't enemies, but allies. Alden walked those streets often. They weren't named after investors or politicians. They bore names of trees, rivers, architects long forgotten by the world. The buildings were not monuments of ego, but carefully designed habitats. Flexible, adaptive, human. He lived simply now, in a modest unit near the community greenhouse. No staff, no press, just a desk, a pot of coffee, and morning sun spilling across a wall of hand-drawn schematics. Mira Halden had not been heard from in over 3 years. After the Oslo Symposium fallout, she withdrew completely from public view. Rumors suggested she had moved abroad, taken a different name. Alden never followed her path. He no longer needed to. Stellan Voss, once a golden figure in urban design, had lost all credibility. No firm would touch his name. His apologies came in the form of tepid articles, desperate interviews. He faded not with a crash, but with a whimper. But Alden never celebrated their downfall. He had discovered, in the silence left behind by betrayal, something far more valuable than justice. Peace. He reconnected with the people who mattered. His estranged sister, whom he hadn't seen since their mother's funeral, now lived nearby with her children. On Sundays, they visited, shared meals, laughed. He began mentoring again, young designers, architects disillusioned by bureaucracy but still burning with ideas. He taught them not just how to draw structures, but how to protect them. How to recognize the fault lines in character as clearly as those in concrete. His name was no longer trending, and that was how he liked it. Every once in a while, publications would request interviews. A documentary crew once offered to film a series on Halicor's creation. He declined. Legacy, he had learned, didn't require attention. It required roots. One spring afternoon, while planting lavender outside one of the public learning centers, a child approached him, no more than 9, carrying a digital sketchpad. "Are you the man who built this place?" the boy asked. Alden looked at him, wiped soil from his hands, and smiled. "No," he said gently. "I just had the first idea. The rest, that came from people like you." And that was the truth. He had started with pain, with loss, with betrayal that nearly dismantled everything. But what rose from it wasn't just a city. It was a lesson written in steel and earth. That sometimes the collapse isn't the end. It's the excavation. That silence can be more powerful than rage. That the most lasting structures are not those built in the spotlight, but those built in the aftermath, carefully, patiently, with bare hands and an open heart. And so Alden Crane, the man they once tried to erase, became something untouchable. Not a name, not a brand, but a foundation.